In the early years of the Pacific War, Japanese military leaders were confident that their strategy and firepower would quickly overwhelm the United States. They believed that America's industrial might was exaggerated, that its people were too soft and divided to sustain a prolonged conflict, and that a swift, decisive strike would force the U.S. to negotiate peace on Japan's terms. This conviction was rooted not only in strategic calculations, but also in deep cultural assumptions and racial prejudices that blinded them to the true nature of American power. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, was one of the few Japanese leaders who understood the full scale of America's industrial potential and the resolve of its people. Having spent years in the United States, studying its industries and culture, Yamamoto warned repeatedly that Japan's window for victory was narrow, no more than 6 months. Beyond that, he predicted, American firepower and production capacity would overwhelm Japan's military efforts. His warnings, however, were largely ignored by the militarist faction that dominated Japan's government and military command. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was intended to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buy Japan time to consolidate its gains across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The attack was devastating, sinking battleships and killing thousands of American servicemen. Yet crucially, the American aircraft carriers were not in port, and vital infrastructure such as fuel depots and repair facilities remained largely intact. This oversight would prove costly. Japanese generals and admirals initially celebrated the success of Pearl Harbor as a stunning victory, but as the months passed, the reality of American industrial and military response began to dawn on them. The Doolittle raid in April 1942, a daring air strike on Tokyo launched from an aircraft carrier, shattered the illusion of Japanese invulnerability. Though the raid caused minimal physical damage, its psychological impact was profound. It demonstrated that American forces could strike the Japanese home islands, and that the U.S. was willing to take bold risks to retaliate. In the months following Pearl Harbor and the Doolittle raid, Japanese commanders faced a sobering truth. American firepower was not only vast but rapidly increasing. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 marked a turning point. Japan lost 4 of its fleet carriers, along with many of its most experienced pilots. This loss irreparably weakened Japan's offensive capabilities and shifted the balance of naval power in the Pacific. Japanese generals, once confident in their ability to outmatch American forces, began to express grave concerns about the growing disparity in firepower. They recognized that American factories were producing warships, aircraft, and munitions at a scale Japan could not match. The United States had mobilized its entire economy for war, converting automobile factories into aircraft production lines and shipyards into assembly plants that could build vessels faster than Japan could sink them. Despite these realizations, many Japanese leaders clung to the hope that fierce fighting and tactical brilliance could compensate for their industrial shortcomings. They believed that inflicting heavy casualties on American forces would sap the will of the U.S. public to continue the war. This belief was tragically mistaken. The brutal campaigns in Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands, and later battles such as Saipan and Okinawa revealed the tenacity and determination of American soldiers, sailors, and airmen. Japanese generals witnessed firsthand the ferocity with which American forces fought, often pushing through overwhelming odds and sustaining heavy losses without faltering. The myth of American softness was shattered. In private conversations and official reports, Japanese commanders lamented their underestimation of American firepower and resolve. They acknowledged that the industrial and technological advantages of the United States were far greater than they had anticipated. The sheer volume of American aircraft, ships, and tanks produced dwarfed Japan's capacity, and the quality of American training and equipment improved steadily throughout the war. One recurring theme in these reflections was the failure to grasp the nature of American society and democracy. Japanese leaders had assumed that the individualistic, comfort-loving American public would not endure the sacrifices required for total war. Instead, They found a nation united by a shared sense of purpose and willing to mobilize every resource to achieve victory. The cultural arrogance that had led to Japan's initial miscalculations was a bitter pill to swallow. Many generals admitted that their strategic assumptions were based on stereotypes and wishful thinking rather than hard evidence. They had underestimated the American capacity for innovation, adaptation, and sustained effort. As the war dragged on and Japan's situation became increasingly desperate, some generals expressed regret that they had not heeded Yamamoto's warnings. They recognized that the attack on Pearl Harbor, while tactically brilliant, had awakened a sleeping giant. The American industrial machine, once roused, was unstoppable. In the final months of the war, as American B-29 bombers devastated Japanese cities, and the Navy was reduced to a shadow of its former self, Japanese military leaders faced the grim reality that their country could not win. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the war to a catastrophic conclusion, but the seeds of defeat had been sown years earlier in the failure to understand American firepower and will. This story is not just about military hardware or battlefield tactics. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating an opponent based on cultural biases and incomplete information. The reflections of Japanese generals after the fact reveal a profound lesson. True power lies not only in weapons and numbers, but in the spirit and determination of a people united behind a cause. Understanding what Japanese generals said about American firepower after it was too late offers valuable insights into the complexities of war, the importance of accurate intelligence, and the human factors that shape history. It reminds us that victory is never guaranteed, and that respect for one's adversary is essential in both war and peace. As the war progressed, the initial confidence of Japanese military leaders gave way to a growing awareness of the overwhelming industrial and military power of the United States. This realization was not immediate, nor was it universally accepted within the Japanese command. Many generals and admirals clung to outdated assumptions and cultural prejudices that blinded them to the true scale of the challenge they faced. Yet, behind closed doors and in candid reports, the truth about American firepower was becoming impossible to ignore. One of the most striking aspects of the Japanese military's misjudgment was their failure to appreciate the speed and scale at which American industry could mobilize for war. Before the conflict, Japan's leaders had studied American production capabilities, but dismissed the likelihood that a democratic society could harness its full potential in wartime. They believed that political divisions, labor disputes, and public resistance to rationing would cripple America's ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. This belief was shattered by the reality of American wartime production. Factories that once produced cars, refrigerators, and consumer goods were rapidly converted to manufacture aircraft, tanks, ships, and munitions. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant became a symbol of this transformation, producing B-24 Liberator bombers on an assembly line faster than any factory in the world had ever built aircraft. Shipyards expanded exponentially, with Henry Kaiser's innovative techniques reducing the construction time of Liberty ships from months to mere days. Japanese generals, who had once scoffed at the idea of American industrial might, were forced to confront the staggering output of their adversary. Reports from the front lines and intelligence briefings detailed the relentless flow of American reinforcements, supplies, and equipment. The disparity was clear. While Japan struggled to replace lost ships and aircraft, the United States was building new fleets and air forces at an unprecedented pace. This industrial advantage translated directly into battlefield firepower. American forces were equipped with newer, more reliable weapons, and supported by vast logistical networks that ensured steady supplies of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. The quality of American training and tactics improved as well, with soldiers, sailors, and airmen gaining combat experience and adapting to Japanese strategies. Japanese commanders noted with growing alarm the increasing effectiveness of American air power. The introduction of long-range bombers like the B-29 Superfortress allowed the U.S. to strike deep into the Japanese home islands, targeting industrial centers, military installations, and civilian populations. The devastating firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945, which killed an estimated 100,000 people in a single night, was a grim demonstration of American firepower and resolve. In contrast, Japan's own industrial base was severely limited. The country lacked the natural resources and manufacturing capacity to match American production. Allied submarine warfare and air raids further crippled Japanese supply lines and factories. As a result, Japanese forces often faced shortages of fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts, hampering their ability to sustain combat operations. The psychological impact of American firepower on Japanese military leaders was profound. Many generals expressed frustration and despair at the growing gap between their forces and those of the United States. They recognized that no amount of bravery or tactical skill could compensate for the overwhelming material superiority of their enemy. This realization was compounded by the tenacity and fighting spirit of American troops. Japanese military doctrine had emphasized the importance of spiritual strength and the warrior ethos, believing that these qualities would give their soldiers an edge over supposedly soft and undisciplined American forces. However, the reality on the battlefield was starkly different. American soldiers, Marines, and airmen fought with determination and resilience that surprised and often shocked their Japanese adversaries. They pressed attacks despite heavy casualties, adapted quickly to changing conditions, and demonstrated a willingness to endure hardship and sacrifice. The myth of American softness was shattered in battles such as Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Okinawa, where fierce combat and high casualties became the norm. Japanese generals acknowledged in their reports and memoirs that they had underestimated the resolve of the American people. They had mistaken isolationist policies and public debate for weakness, failing to grasp the depth of national unity that emerged after Pearl Harbor. The attack that was meant to demoralize the United States instead galvanized it, turning a divided nation into a formidable war machine. One of the most poignant reflections came from officers who had witnessed the transformation firsthand. They noted that American civilians accepted rationing, worked long hours in factories, and supported the war effort with a level of commitment that rivaled or exceeded that of totalitarian states. The iconic image of Rossi, the riveter, symbolized this collective determination. The cultural arrogance that had shaped Japanese strategic thinking was laid bare by these experiences. Many generals admitted that their assumptions about American society were based on stereotypes and wishful thinking, rather than a realistic assessment. They had failed to understand that democracy, far from being a weakness, could be a source of strength when the nation was united by a common cause. Despite these sobering insights, some Japanese leaders continued to hope that tactical victories and inflicting heavy casualties on American forces might force a negotiated peace. They believed that the American public would tire of the war if the cost became too high. This belief was tragically mistaken. The brutal campaigns in the Pacific only hardened American resolve. Each costly victory for Japan was met with renewed determination by the United States to press forward. The sacrifices of American servicemen and civilians alike fueled a collective commitment to total victory, no matter the cost. As the war neared its end, Japanese generals faced the grim reality that their country was losing. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 were the final blow, but the seeds of defeat had been sown long before. The failure to accurately assess American firepower and had set Japan on a path to ruin. In the aftermath, many Japanese military leaders reflected on the lessons of the war. They recognized that underestimating an opponent based on cultural biases and incomplete information was a fatal error. The story of Japan's misjudgment serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of war and the importance of understanding one's adversary. The reflections of these generals offer valuable insights into the human factors that shape history. They reveal how pride, prejudice, and wishful thinking can cloud judgment and lead to catastrophic consequences. They also highlight the resilience and strength that can emerge from a united people facing existential threats. Understanding what Japanese generals said about American firepower after it was too late is not just an exercise in historical analysis. It is a lesson for all who study conflict, strategy, and international relations. It underscores the need for humility, accurate intelligence, and respect for the capabilities and resolve of others. As we remember the sacrifices and struggles of those who lived through the Pacific War, we are reminded that history is shaped not only by weapons and tactics, but by the perceptions and decisions of leaders. The story of Japan's miscalculation is a cautionary tale that continues to resonate today. The story of Japan's underestimation of American firepower is deeply intertwined with the cultural and strategic mindset of its military leadership in the years leading up to and during World War II. To fully grasp why Japanese generals were caught off guard by the scale and effectiveness of American military production and resolve, it is essential to explore the beliefs and assumptions that shaped their worldview. Japanese military culture in the early 20th century was heavily influenced by notions of honor, sacrifice, and spiritual strength. The samurai legacy and Bushido code emphasized loyalty, courage, and the willingness to die for one's country. These values were instilled in soldiers and officers alike, fostering a belief that moral and spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantages. This belief was reinforced by Japan's earlier military successes, most notably the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. Japan's stunning victory over a major European power was seen as proof that superior spirit and strategy could triumph over greater numbers and resources. The surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur and the decisive Battle of Tsushima became templates for future military planning. However, this confidence also bred a dangerous complacency. Japanese leaders came to believe that a swift, decisive strike could force a larger power to negotiate rather than fight a prolonged war. This assumption was central to the planning of the Pearl Harbor attack, which aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and secure Japan's dominance in the Pacific. Yet, the lessons of the Russo-Japanese War were incomplete. Japan's victory owed as much to Russian weaknesses, such as internal unrest, logistical challenges, and overextension, as to Japanese strength. The Japanese military failed to recognize that the United States was fundamentally different from Russia in terms of industrial capacity, geographic advantage, and national unity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was one of the few Japanese leaders who understood these differences. His time in America, studying at Harvard and traveling across the country, gave him a unique perspective on American society and industry. He saw firsthand the scale of American production and the determination of its people. Yamamoto's warnings about the limits of Japan's ability to sustain a war with the United States were prescient. He predicted that Japan could achieve initial victories, but would ultimately be overwhelmed if the conflict dragged on beyond 6 months. Unfortunately, his cautionary advice was largely ignored by the militarists who dominated Japan's government. The attack on Pearl Harbor, while tactically brilliant, failed to achieve its strategic objectives fully. The American aircraft carriers, which would prove decisive in the Pacific War, were not in port. Critical infrastructure such as fuel depots and repair facilities remained intact. These oversights allowed the United States to recover quickly and mount a powerful counteroffensive. The Doolittle raid in April 1942 was a wake-up call for Japanese military leaders. Although the raid caused minimal physical damage, it shattered the myth of Japanese invulnerability and demonstrated American reach and resolve. The psychological impact was significant, forcing Japan to accelerate plans for further expansion and defense. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a pivotal moment. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers and many experienced pilots, crippling its offensive capabilities. American codebreakers had deciphered Japanese plans, allowing the U.S. Navy to ambush the Japanese fleet. This intelligence coup underscored the importance of information and adaptability in modern warfare. Following Midway, The war in the Pacific became a grinding contest of attrition. Japanese forces faced increasing shortages of fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. American industrial output surged, producing ships, aircraft, and weapons at a scale Japan could not match. Japanese generals began to express concern about the widening gap in firepower. Reports from the front lines described the relentless pressure of American air and naval forces. The introduction of the B-29 Superfortress bomber brought the war to the Japanese home islands, inflicting devastating damage. The firebombing of Tokyo and other cities in 1945 caused immense civilian casualties and destruction. These attacks demonstrated the full extent of American industrial and military power. Japanese leaders realized that their country's infrastructure and population were vulnerable in ways they had not anticipated. Despite these challenges, Japanese military doctrine continued to emphasize spiritual strength and sacrifice. Soldiers were expected to fight to the death rather than surrender, leading to brutal and costly battles such as Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Okinawa. The ferocity of Japanese resistance shocked American commanders, but ultimately could not stem the tide. American forces, meanwhile, demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. They learned from early setbacks, improved tactics, and leveraged their industrial advantage to sustain prolonged campaigns. The image of the determined, well-equipped American soldier became a stark contrast to Japanese expectations. Japanese generals reflected on these developments with a mixture of respect and regret. They acknowledged that their initial assumptions about American weakness were flawed. The democratic society they had dismissed as soft proved capable of extraordinary sacrifice and unity when faced with existential threat. The cultural arrogance that had shaped Japanese strategic thinking was a critical factor in their miscalculation. Many leaders had relied on racial stereotypes and wishful thinking rather than objective analysis. This failure to understand the true nature of their adversary contributed to Japan's eventual defeat. In the final months of the war, as American forces closed in on the Japanese home islands, military leaders faced the harsh reality of impending defeat. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the conflict to a catastrophic end, but the seeds of Japan's downfall had been sown years earlier. The reflections of Japanese generals after the war offer valuable lessons about the dangers of underestimating an opponent and the importance of accurate intelligence and cultural understanding. Their candid admissions reveal the human dimension of strategic failure and the consequences of pride and prejudice. This story is not merely a historical account, but a timeless warning. It reminds us that in war, as in all conflicts, respect for the capabilities and resolve of others is essential. Misjudgments based on cultural biases can lead to devastating outcomes. As we remember the sacrifices of those who fought and died in the Pacific War, we honor their memory by learning from the past. The insights of Japanese generals about American firepower, spoken too late to change the course of history, continue to resonate as a powerful testament to the complexities of war and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the war dragged on, the Japanese military leadership faced increasingly dire circumstances, and their reflections on American firepower grew more urgent and candid. The initial hubris that had characterized Japan's approach to the conflict was replaced by a sober recognition of the overwhelming industrial and military might arrayed against them. This shift in perspective was not just about numbers and weapons. It was about the fundamental misreading of American society, its values, and its capacity for sustained warfare. One of the most significant miscalculations was the belief that American democracy and individualism would prevent the United States from fully mobilizing for war. Japanese leaders assumed that political divisions, labor unrest, and a public unwilling to endure hardship would cripple the American war effort. They saw democracy as a weakness, a system that prioritized comfort and personal freedom over national sacrifice. However, the reality was starkly different. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, the American people rallied with unprecedented unity and determination. The government swiftly enacted rationing, war bond drives, and industrial conversion programs. Factories operated around the clock, producing planes, ships, tanks, and weapons at a scale that astonished even their own leaders. Japanese generals, in their post-war reflections, expressed amazement at the speed and efficiency of American industrial mobilization. The transformation of automobile plants into aircraft factories, the rapid expansion of shipyards, and the mass production of war materiel were feats of engineering and organization that Japan could not match. The sheer volume of American production overwhelmed Japanese forces on every front. This industrial advantage was complemented by technological innovation. The United States invested heavily in research and development, producing advanced aircraft, radar systems, and naval vessels. The introduction of the B-29 Superfortress, capable of long-range bombing missions over Japan, was a game changer. It allowed the U.S. to bring the war directly to the Japanese homeland, breaking the illusion of invulnerability. Japanese military leaders also grappled with the psychological impact of American firepower. The relentless bombing campaigns devastated cities, infrastructure, and civilian morale. Yet, rather than breaking the will of the Japanese people, these attacks often strengthened their resolve to resist. The concept of fighting to the death, deeply ingrained in Japanese military culture, meant that surrender was not an option for many soldiers and civilians alike. The battles of Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were brutal tests of American firepower and Japanese determination. Japanese commanders ordered their troops to fight to the last man, resulting in staggering casualties on both sides. The use of kamikaze tactics, suicide attacks by pilots against American ships, was a desperate attempt to counterbalance the overwhelming material superiority of the U.S. Navy. Despite these efforts, the disparity in firepower and resources was insurmountable. American forces had the advantage of numbers, technology, and logistics. They could replace losses quickly and sustain prolonged operations far from their home bases. Japanese forces, isolated and cut off from supplies, faced starvation, disease, and exhaustion. In private discussions and official reports, Japanese generals lamented their failure to anticipate the scale and effectiveness of American firepower. They acknowledged that their strategic assumptions were flawed and that their cultural biases had blinded them to the true nature of their adversary. The belief that America was a soft, divided nation unwilling to fight was a dangerous illusion. One of the most poignant admissions came from officers who had witnessed the transformation of American society during the war. They noted that the democratic process, far from being a hindrance, was a source of strength. The ability of the American people to debate, deliberate, and then unite behind a common cause was a testament to the resilience of their political system. The reflections of Japanese generals also highlighted the importance of intelligence and information in modern warfare. The success of American codebreakers in deciphering Japanese plans, such as at Midway, was a critical factor in turning the tide of the war. Japanese leaders recognized that their failure to protect their communications and anticipate American capabilities contributed to their defeat. As the war neared its end, the cumulative effect of American firepower and industrial capacity became undeniable. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the final, devastating demonstration of this power. These attacks forced Japan's surrender, but also underscored the tragic consequences of the earlier miscalculations. In the post-war period, many Japanese military leaders expressed regret that they had not heeded the warnings of figures like Admiral Yamamoto, who had understood the true nature of American power. Yamamoto's prediction that Japan's chances of victory were limited to a brief window was tragically accurate. The lessons drawn from these reflections extend beyond the historical context of World War II. They serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating an opponent based on cultural stereotypes and incomplete information. They remind us that military power is not just about weapons and numbers, but but about the will, unity, and resilience of a nation. Understanding what Japanese generals said about American firepower after it was too late offers valuable insights into the complexities of war and the human factors that influence its outcome. It challenges us to look beyond surface appearances and to appreciate the depth and diversity of our adversaries. As we remember the sacrifices made during the Pacific War, we honor not only the bravery of those who fought, but also the hard-earned lessons that emerged from the conflict. These lessons continue to inform military strategy, international relations, and our understanding of human nature. The story of Japan's misjudgment is a powerful reminder that respect, humility, and accurate knowledge are essential in any conflict. It teaches us that victory is never guaranteed, and that the true measure of power lies in the spirit and determination of a people united behind a cause. The final chapter of Japan's reflections on American firepower is marked by a profound reckoning with the consequences of their strategic miscalculations. As the war drew to a close, Japanese generals and military leaders faced the harsh reality that their nation's defeat was not simply a matter of battlefield losses, but a failure to understand the true nature of their adversary. In the years following the surrender, many of these leaders spoke candidly about the mistakes that had led to Japan's downfall. They acknowledged that their initial assumptions about American weakness were rooted in cultural arrogance and a lack of first-hand knowledge. The belief that the United States was a soft, divided, and unwilling combatant was a dangerous illusion that blinded them to the scale of the challenge. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's warnings, which had been dismissed or ignored, were vindicated in the harshest terms. His understanding of American industrial capacity and national resolve was unmatched among Japanese leaders. He had foreseen that Japan's window for victory was narrow, and that prolonged conflict would favor the United States. Yet despite his prescient insights, the militarist faction pressed forward with a war they could not win. The attack on Pearl Harbor, intended to deliver a knockout blow, instead galvanized American society and unleashed a war machine of unprecedented scale. The failure to destroy American aircraft carriers and critical infrastructure at Pearl Harbor was a strategic oversight that allowed the United States to recover and counterattack with devastating effectiveness. The subsequent battles of Midway, Guadalcanal, and the island-hopping campaigns revealed the growing disparity in firepower and resources. Japanese generals witnessed the relentless advance of American forces, supported by an industrial base that produced ships, planes, and weapons at a pace Japan could not match. In their reflections, Japanese military leaders expressed a deep respect for the American people's resilience and determination. They recognized that democracy, far from being a weakness, was a source of strength that enabled the United States to mobilize its vast resources and sustain a prolonged conflict. The cultural misunderstandings that had shaped Japanese strategic thinking were laid bare. The stereotypes and prejudices that had led to underestimating American resolve were replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of the true nature of their adversary. The devastating firebombing campaigns and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the final blows that forced Japan's surrender. These attacks underscored the overwhelming power of American firepower and the tragic cost of the earlier miscalculations. In the aftermath, the lessons learned from Japan's experience have resonated far beyond the Pacific War. They serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating an opponent based on cultural biases and incomplete information. They highlight the importance of accurate intelligence, respect for adversaries, and the need to understand the social and political fabric that underpins military power. The reflections of Japanese generals after the war offer a human dimension to the story of conflict. They reveal how pride, prejudice, and flawed assumptions can lead to catastrophic consequences. They also demonstrate the resilience and strength that can emerge from a united people facing existential threats. As we look back on this history, we are reminded that war is not merely a contest of weapons and tactics, but a complex interplay of culture, psychology, and human will. The story of what Japanese generals said about American firepower after it was too late is a powerful testament to the enduring lessons of history. It challenges us to approach conflict with humility and a commitment to understanding. It warns against the perils of arrogance and the false security of stereotypes. And it honors the sacrifices of those who fought and died by ensuring that their stories are remembered and their lessons heeded. In the end, the legacy of this story is one of caution and hope. Caution against repeating the mistakes of the past, and hope that through understanding and respect, future conflicts can be avoided or resolved with greater wisdom. Thank you for joining us in exploring this important chapter of history. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to help us continue bringing untold stories from the past to life. Your engagement helps keep these lessons alive for generations to come.